What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Bat Chat number 6. Appreciate y'all being here. Sorry I was late. Had some technical difficulties. Couldn't get any of my devices to work without doing updates and restarting the computer. So that's always fun. So today wanted to essentially cover one main topic, and that's around edginess, and then how it ties into indie comics, not just how indie comics became a thing, but how it relates to indie comics today and the impact that it has, positive or negative, on indie comics, and then tie that into mainstream comics. And one of the kind of indirect topics from that would be smut, which is obviously edgy by definition to an extent, and then also talk about whether or not the indie space lacking originality is actually an issue for it, and if the lack of originality and smut kind of being a let's say a overly popular thing, let's say in indie comics, it seems, what that does in regards to reinforcing stereotypes of the indie comic space. So, in regards to edginess in indie comics, I've made a Twitter post or two in regards to the topic, and even when I've made posts that's unrelated to that, I've had people come in and say, "Oh, indie comics was 100% like based around being edgy," and a lot of the edgy creators is there who were trailblazers in indie comics and made indie comics a thing. And I would agree to an extent, but they're trying to relate that to today, to modern comics, to modern society, and modern creative space. And what was edgy back then, would that even be considered edgy today? So that's kind of the first thing I want to touch on. So, by definition, edginess in comics refers to the use of dark, violent, cynical, or transgressive themes. While some stories use a sharp edge to subvert tropes and explore mature psychological depths, gratuitous edginess relies on shock value, excessive gore, and nihilism purely for attention, and some would say without real narrative purpose. Now, when it comes to mainstream comics, people would say, in terms of the bronze and like modern age shift, that's where Watchmen, Dark Knight Returns was. They were more edgy takes on vigilantes, on heroes, and then of course in the '90s you had the anti-hero boom, which a lot of those characters were edgy to an extent. Now, there's appreciation around edginess when it comes to, let's say, the 1970s and the '80s, right, when you had the code of conduct, essentially. So the code of authority was, I mean, it was bullshit, right? It was essentially censorship, and it was similar to some of the, I would say, extremists, right, that would say, "Oh, you can't have your kids watch Harry Potter," and we're all anti Harry Potter because it has magic and fantasy and all of that, and trying to relate that to Satan and demons and all of that, versus it just being fantasy and fiction. And so, the trailblazers of edginess, such as Frank Miller, in terms of the mainstream, right? They were the ones that were anti-censorship, and they could also implement some shock value and dramatic effect without sacrificing the story or the characters, essentially. And if it weren't for people like them, the Comics Code Authority may have existed much longer, and we wouldn't have phenomenal books like Dark Knight Returns and Sin City. Now, here's the thing: when a lot of those, let's say, creators that had edgy content back in the 70s and 80s, right? That could just be violence. That could just be considered fantasy, anti-hero, you name it. It was things that today you would kind of be like, oh, that's not really edgy. That's normal. Same thing with nudity, right? Films, comics, novels, they've all normalized most of the stuff that was considered edgy back in the 70s and 80s. Now, you could say, yeah, DC and Marvel, their stuff's not very edgy. There's not, nudity, things of that nature. Uh, which I appreciate the fact that they haven't really allowed things to go over the top. But you still had publishers like Dark Horse and others that, of course, had content with nudity and whatnot, and what would be considered very edgy content. But to me, in reality, a lot of that stuff is not edgy, not really, uh, because it's normal. Really, a high percentage of creators are implementing that content, whether it's at a large scale or a lesser scale, into their comics or novels or films. It's almost more rare to not have what used to be considered edgy material in content today. So, even though I agree that the edgy creators in comics were trailblazers of indie comics, and what they were pushing for was more than necessary, especially to counter the Comics Code Authority. Um, I think some creators these days have tried to be very hyperbolic and exaggerate those creators in in order to justify their own, per se, edgy material. When you have creators that they're just producing straight up smut or just over the top gore and violence to the extent that you can't even really tell what the main, like, the core of the story is outside of just, hey, violence or just nudity. They kind of use those trailblazers as a shield, like, oh yeah, but indie comics, they became a thing because of edginess. And it's like, yeah, but back then they weren't using it as the entirety of their story, right? They had really good plots. They were doing horror stories and fantasy stories in books like Sin City, where, yes, they would implement some edginess for that shock value and dramatic effect, but it wasn't on every single page. It wasn't, shoving it down your throat like some modern creators do today. And the same thing could be said about, right, things that are considered political or woke or whatever. There are creators that just go over the top and they're just trying to shove it down your throat to where the stories are sacrificed, or there's not much interest or intrigue around the stories as a whole because of it. So I just don't think it's fair to essentially use them as a shield or justification for content that is just overtly, quote unquote, edgy. I think Frank Miller is the perfect example of how to implement edginess into comics with Sin City, for example. Right? He had nudity in it, he had gore, he had drugs, but it all served a purpose to the overall story. Now, personally, would I have appreciated it more if the book didn't have the nudity? Yes, personal preference. Um, I have no issue with people that uh, have the opposite stance, but the reason why I make an exception for books like that is because there's so much character development. The stories are very deep and intriguing, and so I'm willing to overlook some of the things that I would normally not appreciate because the overarching book is so phenomenal. So he knew how to throw bits and pieces of edginess in there to enhance the story. So he could get that shock value. He could have that dramatic effect without every single page just going over the top. And that's one of the things that's highlighted in his Push the Wall book, where he says, essentially it's about a balance. You you don't want to sacrifice story, and you can't just solely rely on edginess. You have to make sure that you're relying on the core concepts of the medium as well. All right, looks like we have our first guest. We have Mr. Dan from Godful Universe. How's it
Yo,
going?
sorry I'm late. Someone would jump in before me and I could make fun of them or something.
I think your mic is super, super low or something
Oh, is it?
from the wrong source.
How about now?
Still
Still
really.
bad? All right, give me a second. All right, let's try that. Is that a little bit better?
A little bit,
All
but
right.
still really
I'll
quiet.
just yell.
Is it coming from the right source or?
Yeah, I got a Scarlet USB, one of those little one in, one out type things. I'll take the
Hmm,
mic cover off. Is that better?
a little bit, yeah. Yeah, maybe even let me see if I can do anything from my end.
All right.
Let's see. Edit mic settings. Oh, I can't increase the volume, but you could try to go into your settings and just jack up your volume to maybe like 150. See what that does.
Yeah, I'll do that.
So let's check in with the chat here. So we have Jimmy the Lumberjack, LBA Smug Turner in the chat. That's right, Severus Smug. How's it going? What's going on, Andrew Campbell? Thanks for being here. So Jimmy the Lumberjack says parents should be the arbitrator of what their children should see or read. At 12 or 13, you have to allow children to expand certain stories. Basically, it depends on the child. Yeah, I agree with that. That's
Yeah.
where the comics code of 30 was nonsense, right? It was trying to force the publishers and the corporate world to adhere to their beliefs, and it was more in line with the Red Scare than anything. But in reality, it should be up to the parents to prevent their children from potentially being exposed to something that's not that they're not ready for or that they deem immoral. But in reality, for comics, right, unless there's like nudity on a cover or something, most comics you can kind of tell what the tone of that comic is going to be. And, if it's a small kid, they're not going to be going to a comic shop by themselves, anyways. So the parents should be there with them.
Yep.
What's going
I
on,
think it's
Katie? Thanks for being
maybe
here.
a I think maybe it's a little bit different in the age of the internet, with
True.
network devices. But yeah, especially the Comics Code Authority. I mean, you had to go somewhere and grab something, pay for it.
Hmm. Yep,
Does that sound
absolutely.
better? Is that a
You're
volume a little bit better?
a little bit, yeah. Yep.
All right, I'll
Yeah.
fix them.
And
All right.
then let's see here. Yeah, I mean that's the one. Well, I mean that's a huge tricky situation with the internet now, right? At least Kickstarter does a decent job, at least covering up or ensuring that nudity is covered up. But at the same time, man, you go on the Kickstarter app and you go to Indie Comics and you're just like, my God, I would never want my child perusing Kickstarter for comics because even though some of the stuff's covered up, it's still it's way too over the top, especially for a kid or even a young teenager. Um, so that's definitely a potential drawback there.
Oh yeah, I mean, anime has the or manga has the same thing. It's just
Hmm.
It's really funny because anime and manga have both been so poorly, like in the best way, in a lot of ways, poorly regulated because like the shop owners for decades did not read or view what came in.
Hmm.
Like there are countless stories, like myself included, and like friends where like you may have accidentally either seen or like purchased a hentai back in the day, like because they just did not care. Like they would throw anything on a shelf. And
Hmm.
a lot of manga will have like an innocent cover, and then you open it and it's got like the most atrocious thing you'd want a child to see in the middle of it. And
Hmm.
you and I are particularly kind of infamous on this topic. Smut is smut. Say what it is, sell it for what it is. Don't try to
Hmm.
sneak it in as something it's not. I
Hmm.
think there's a place for the carnival, the peripheral, and the shocking. I
Hmm.
think the mixture of the two is not right. And I think the smuggling it as something else or just anything that's cheap. If you sell me like a pious looking book and it's cheap and you're just using it for like something, that's the turn off, I think. Be honest about what you're selling.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's even when I get a laugh out of some of the creators that are like, oh, but the interior doesn't actually have nudity, but the cover is like over the top, like sexual and has nudity, and it's like, well, to me that's just bait. Like, why would you not
Yeah.
have? That's just as bad as someone having a top notch pro cover and then the interior looks like chicken scratch, right? It's especially with indie comics, that's a little that's misleading for sure. I mean, hopefully they have some interior pages to allow the potential reader to compare, but uh, you know, with the smut comics, it's like, if they're only showing 2 or 3 pages and it's a 50-page book, they would probably assume that, hey, what's on the cover, there's going to be more of that in the book. So it's like, yeah, I don't really understand that approach.
I don't either. Particularly like I don't know, we've had this argument a billion times and I've never seen maybe one person be honest about it.
Hmm.
And I wish I could remember her name off the top of my head on Twitter, but she's writing Sex the comic and it's literally
Mm.
about like a nerdy guy landing like a hot chick in high school and the awkwardness and
Hmm.
strangeness that comes from them like trying to like have intercourse.
Hmm.
And it's not meant to be titillizing. But it is like it does have sexual content. It's
Hmm.
just this is what this is. It's a comedy book that's about this topic.
Hmm.
And like that's the most honest thing I've ever heard. Like it's so much better than I'm going to sell you a this is a shonen adventure story, but it's got like a naked chick on the cover.
Hmm.
And okay, well why? Oh, because that's just I don't know. That's just what I wanted to do. Like okay, I think you wanted to sell books and you're just not being honest. And I don't know. There's things about it that, bro. I get marketing and I get appealing to people, but there crosses a line where it just feels limp wristed and lame. Like when this
Hmm.
woman drawing a book called Sex the Comic is much more like has more of a backbone than you. Like, come on.
Hmm. Yeah, and I also don't like the other thing is like so many of these books are also parodies. It's like, what's with this obsession of just taking mainstream or popular characters, most of which are meant to be innocent to an extent or heroic, and then
Hmm.
completely bastardizing them and just turning them into sexual content. It's like that to me is it's not you're being edgy because that's what was the backbone of the indie movement. It's like, no, that's taking edginess to a whole another level. It's not even respecting the medium at that point or creativity.
Oh yeah, I mean that's the thing is you get porn or you get horror when it comes to that. I know I'm Southern and I should say horror. I get it. So I'm just going to slur the word. But like horror at least still has a punk rock edge to it because
Mhm.
it's not taken seriously and it's not massively commercialized. A24 is doing their damnedest to ruin it. And I've got a bone to pick with that entire studio. I think they're hacks, but pornography used to be kind of on the edge of things. Now
Hmm.
it's not. And this is me speaking secularly, like from a, like, let's say, sociological point of view. Like, pornography used to be this thing that was kept hidden, and it was on the
Hmm.
outskirts and it was on the edges.
Hmm.
Now anyone with a network device can get it instantly. From a
Hmm.
purely secular sociological view of things, it's not punk rock anymore. And I
Right.
think that's why, I think that's a big reason we're getting this mass quote unquote Puritan pushback from like Gen Z, and they don't like overt sexual content in their non-sexual stuff now because
Hmm.
they grew up with pornography.
Well, that's the thing. Like, that's what I was saying at the start of the stream is that so many things that were deemed like edgy in the 70s and 80s are normal now. They've been
Yep.
so normalized to where to be edgy in today's age, like you got to go straight into degeneracy or wokeness or like to the level where it's just straight up uncomfortable, like
Yeah.
some of these covers and books that we've seen. And it's not doing anything to improve stories and it's not creating any works of art, like Sin City. Like Sin City's again the perfect example of injecting it in bits and pieces for shock value and dramatic effect, but not
Hmm.
having it so overtly in your face that it distracts you from the actual character development in the story.
Well, look at the title, Sin City. The whole point is that he's showing you how awful this city is.
Right. Right. Yep.
Like,
Yeah, it
that's
was
the whole
more
thing.
realism than anything.
Yeah. And well, that's the thing is like it's these people caught in a terrible place, and even like Nancy the stripper, like the whole what you learn in that Yellow Bastard is that was she was this little girl whose family got killed. She was kidnapped by a pedophile, and this is how she escapes that pedophile and
Hmm.
stuff. And like it's a tragic backstory. And the whole point is that like this girl would not be stripping if she didn't have to. And the
Hmm.
second she runs into a paternal figure she thinks she can trust, she
Hmm.
quits everything and joins
Hmm.
him.
Hmm.
And that goes back to like I'm not saying Frank Miller's morality, but the morality he took of the pulp genre, which is, I mean, you know Calvin and Hobbes, of course. Everybody knows Calvin and Hobbes. And there's a
Hmm.
like now kind of online famous strip that he had, Bill Watterson had, where Calvin pretends he's like a noir detective, and it's some of the best noir writing ever. And but when you read it, like he captures it in like 3 panels, the entire genre, and you get it. It's like, oh, it's a guy that he's not bad, but he's a little bit hardened to the world because the world sucks, and
Hmm.
he is presented as a incarnate negative of that evil. He becomes hard to stop the harshness of the world, and that's what Sin City is.
Hmm. Yep. Yeah, and Jimmy's comment here. He says, "If I was a creator, I would steer my book to be like a PG-13 content, some violence and
Yep.
no nudity." And that's the exact approach I've taken. I mean, mine, I guess, could be considered R-rated just because of swearing, but even though I guess swearing has obviously been normalized as well, I don't think it's as bad, for kids to be exposed to in comparison to the sexual content or, in regards to what that can do to a young person's brain. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's like I want to have some blood and violence and brutality only because that lines up with reality. I mean, what actually
Yeah.
happens in some of these cities and it also adds that dramatic effect and it allows you to push the limits of heroism, right? If they actually have a antagonist that is cruel beyond belief, they have to actually push the limits to be able to defeat them. They have to do even more extreme heroic acts versus saving a cat from a tree, for example, that type of thing.
Well, I mean, this goes back to a theory I've had, and I'm pretty sure I've discussed it with you before or peripherally. Um, since, and I'm not going to use the term Judeo-Christian because I don't think that's a useful term for us.
Hmm.
But going back to the Old Testament and before then into Christian society and that tradition, sex was always private. Um,
Hmm.
Violence was always public. And the difference is sex is sacred and violence is mundane. Back in the day, if you were a child, you were seeing violence all the time. People were killing things to eat. You had to.
Hmm.
Um,
Right.
you were seeing men hung for doing terrible things. Sex was sacred. It was the pagans that had some kind of sex ritual.
Hmm.
It was not either the and usually societies when they started doing that they usually collapsed, and that's kind of what we're seeing now. Like the more you bring sex out of the private and out of the sacred and make it mundane, usually that's corrosive for a society, and
Hmm.
that is kind of a soapbox for me. It's like, look, you don't. I'm saying this to like creators. It's like you don't realize what you're playing with. You're playing with fire and you don't realize it. Now, some people do, and they say we sell sex comics, whatever. It's like, then at least admit what you're doing. Don't try to. I got in an argument with some lady that tried to like call it like art, and it's like, but all the art she would post was like Da Vinci, and it's like, okay, your stuff doesn't look like that. Your stuff looks like crap. Like, there's a difference between Michelangelo and Star Wars. Like,
Hmm.
and the reason that exists is because one is art and one is pornography. I think nudity can be art.
Hmm.
That's been a tradition. That's been a Christian tradition, even. But I mean, I think a lot of societies, women just walked around topless because they were breastfeeding most of the time.
Hmm.
Um, but there's
Well,
there's
it's
just
about
yeah,
intent though too, right?
exactly, yeah.
There's classical art where the intent is to actually just show the beauty of what God created and the human body, and then there's using it to purposely incite certain
Hmm.
reactions or feelings in people. Obviously, in comics, it's usually to incite certain feelings or um, temptations or whatever. Where a lot of that, it's not the case with a lot of the classical art.
Correct. I agree, and a lot of it is like something that's like a woman can be overtly sexual, fully clothed. Like
Hmm.
we understand these like body language, and we understand exactly what you said, like spirit or intent. Like
Hmm.
you can look you can like look at something and tell what it is without it having to be overt. And I think
Hmm.
that's the difference is like when you just throw everything out and it's so overt. The weirdest thing to me is and I think this is like an anime thing, a manga thing, is like the combination of the sexual overt with like the innocence and like sweet side of things. And again, I think
Yeah.
that's more of like a manga thing because like,
Yep.
it's a different culture, and we need to admit that. And there's certain
Mhm.
parts of cultures when you try to translate over, they just don't work. And
Right.
I think that's fine because I don't think every culture is the same.
Hmm. Hmm. Yep. Yeah, so Johnny says, for my books, I've
Hey,
always used
Johnny.
the classic Star Trek as my barometer for what's acceptable. You had deaths and gals and sexy outfits, but it was still wholesome family content. It's possible to do that. Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
that's where I always get a laugh out of folks that'll be like, "Oh, you're just a prude," or "You don't like boobs," or all the immature insults that they can
Yeah,
sling
that's why
at
we're
you. And
both
it's
married,
like,
right?
right, exactly, and we've procreated and all that. Yeah. Um, but it's like, you know, my mini comic, for example, the pages that I've shown of the current comic, that's clearly not the case. I just believe in keeping the the characters clothed, which again, most of the most popular films, most popular TV shows, most popular comics, they did the same thing. They kept characters clothed because the focus was the story, and then you had, a little bit of edginess, just enough to have that dramatic effect, right? They
Yeah.
were able to actually showcase beauty without going over the top, right? They would push the limit, but not go over the limit. And there's just too many people, in my opinion, now, especially in the indie comic space, that are just trying to go over the limit just to say they've went over the limit. Say like, "Oh, I'm doing this," when other people aren't, but that's becoming the norm, unfortunately.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's burning out the nerve system, and God, I got a whole thesis on this. But like, I like the idea of like of Marilyn Manson being the last rock star. I think that's true, and the reason I praise Manson, I'm a musician first and foremost before I even like was an artist, but I praise Manson because he had the wherewithal to know what he was and basically knew like I'm gonna take all the elements of the rock star, and I'm going to turn them up to 11, and it is for shock, but it's also a commentary on that shock.
Mhm.
Um, I say all that to say I think people that are doing what you just said don't have that wherewithal. I
Mhm.
think I can respect something when someone knows what they're doing and can present like a critique of it. When someone is just selling something, I don't care. Like, there's a big difference between, like, I'm trying to even think of an example. Like someone like, this shows my age, like the emo age. There was a band called, like, I think it was, they were called like LMFAO or something like that, or
Yeah, yeah, I
there was
remember them.
another
Yep.
one. Yeah, there was another one like that that did something about, like, their song was like about a pig and they screamed or whatever. But it's like there's a difference between like that schlock and that crap that's clearly like baiting an audience of people that made better things than you, and Manson, or an artist who, despite what you may think of them, was an artist and did something for a reason. It's like when David Bowie
Well,
made the Thin White Duke, which was like his fascist counterpart. He knew
mhm.
what he was doing and he did it for a reason.
Well, pop and rap music and the smut niche of indie comics to me are very, very similar,
Yeah.
right? They're trying to go over that edge and get away with whatever they can. And that, I mean, that's the thing, like, back in the 90s, early 2000s, right? You had punk rock and you had, pop where, yeah, they would kind of similar to Star Trek. Yeah, maybe you had sexy outfits in the music videos and stuff. And, some of the music was indirectly sexual, right? Or there were innuendos. But
Yeah.
today, it's just like, it's disgusting and in your face. And, you could go down the rabbit hole of why you believe those industries have been pushed that way and to manipulate people and spend money. But even on
I'm
the
friends with
surface,
Angus.
yeah. But on the surface, it's like, for example, one of the gyms I was recently going to, I go there with my wife and, we have our kid go to the kids club there or whatever for a bit. All the
Nice.
TVs were just playing the nastiest music videos.
Yeah.
And you're just like, man, they would have never have done that 20, 30 years ago. 20, 30 years ago, they're playing like metal music. And back then, people were afraid of metal music, right? They were afraid of even new metal, Godsmack and Limp Bizkit, whatever, right? But
Mm.
man, now I'm like, man, I would never want my teenage kid going to this gym. Like, this stuff should not be heard in public, not just the
Yeah.
lyrics, but the imagery. And it's like now the gym I go to, at least it's not like on TVs, there's not music video, but some of the songs that come up, you're just like, holy crap. And you see like young teenagers walk around, it's just like, man, like, part of you is like, I don't want this to be illegal, because it's this type of content being just so available and not even like you. I mean, people aren't going to the gym for that, right? It's like an accidental, like, oh, this stuff is playing, but it's yeah, it's completely contributing to the erosion of society and culture in America. Like this stuff would not be happening in a lot of European countries or Asia, for example. Like, no, not at all. Even the way that, I mean, the way people dress in the gym is just that's that's a it goes in the same vein. It's just it's wild.
Well, I think it. If we really want to do a deep dive, I think a part of it is, and I'm not a radical by any means, especially a left wing one, but I think there are problems with the state of how we have a capitalist system that people just. I mean, you see it especially in comics and music. It's like, if it makes money, it must be good, right? It's like, no,
Right.
that's like, capital does not determine moral value,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
that's such a lame excuse. It's like, well, it sold. It's like, okay, well, crack sells. Do you want that in your neighborhood? Like, no, like, you know, it's like,
Exactly.
yeah, and it's like, $1 billion industry is CP. I don't want that in my neighborhood. Like, you should hang people for that. And those sound like extremes, but it's like, I don't like, people will use like the term Puritan. It's like, okay, let's do a dialectic here. Then it's like, okay, the Puritans built America, like literally, like they are the people who turned nothing into what we have now. And you know how
Hmm.
they did that? It wasn't just because they had a work ethic, it's because they also had a view of the world and the sacred, that if they prevented the rot, they can build. I'm not saying we need to go back to being Puritans, but it's like you have to look at things, I think, holistically. Why
Hmm.
were they industrious? Oh, because they
Hmm.
weren't rotting from the inside.
Yep.
And I know that's heady and dumb and historical, but like, I just think it's true, man. I think that you have to look at yourself in the mirror, and like, what's kind of nice in a little bit of way, and I don't mean it mean, it's just like you see these creators burn out. Like, you can only sell this stuff for so long
Hmm.
because it does eat away at you in some way, and it does suck your vitality away in some way. Like, you've seen addicts. I've seen addicts, and I mean, I had them in my family, and you see them basically beat their head into a wall with this thing that they love that's killing them and makes them feel good, but they know it's rotting them away. And I don't think there's a difference, man. And I think that's kind of thankfully coming back. I think people are just saying, like, even if they don't have the words to articulate it, if they don't have the theology or the philosophy, they can still say, I can tell this is not good.
Hmm. Yeah, and like looking back at my childhood, right? I appreciate the fact that gas stations, bookstores, right? They covered up the stuff that was intentionally not supposed to get in front of kids, right?
Yeah.
Blockbuster had a screened off area that they would monitor, right? Like, but now, yeah, with the internet, it's just like, geez, there's, I mean, Twitter, Instagram, they're all just trying to shove the worst of the worst in front of you per the algorithm. And it's, it's like, do comics want to contribute to that? I, they shouldn't, like I said, back then it was different. Edginess was just trying to have a fantasy story,
Mm-hmm.
having werewolves, having, vampires, having mythical creatures, having some horror, and then, bits of nudity. And, I don't like when people try to say that beautiful women in comics is edgy. No, that's just normal to me, right? It's how
Yeah.
you portray them. It's the intent of how they're used in the book. And I think it creates a bad look on the indie space. If you want to compare the indies, the trailblazers from, you know, 30, 40 years ago, compare their material to the edgy creators of today, it would be embarrassing and a drastic difference in content and imagery.
Oh yeah, I agree. And there's also this idea, which first of all, you and I are both Christians. We believe in an incarnate God. We believe in the spiritual and the physical becoming one. I think that's an indisputable fact, even if you don't believe in Christianity, that you will reach a point where you'll beat your head into a wall and realize the physical or the spiritual, or at least what we have to call the metaphysical and the physical, are one thing. There's no separation. So I say that to say is, like, I've seen indie comics in particular where, let's say, like, there's a scene where like a guy's attacking a woman, the hero's trying to save her, right?
Hmm.
Let's say her shirt gets torn, right? That
Hmm.
can happen in a fight, but they'll draw her in such a way that it's like it's way overtly sexually suggestive, and it's like no woman would act that way or pose that way when getting attacked.
Right.
And you can tell it's the circle, and it's like, and it just is in kind of bad taste. And I think this is something actually feminists had a good view of. Is like there is something about objectification, and
Hmm.
it is like, this is not how you draw a character in this situation. This is just bad art. This is like
Hmm.
the physical and the spiritual not aligning. The intent is some sexual thing, when what is actually happening is this is an assault that's not even a sexual assault. It's just what happened in a fight.
Hmm.
But you're thinking fourth dimensionally, if I want to draw the reader's eyes to this thing so they buy my book. You have now made an eyesore in your own art, if that
Hmm.
makes sense. Like, you've undervalued your own art.
Hmm. What's going on, Mikey? So Mikey's Madness 420 says, "Hail B8 in chat. I find this conversation confusing. Creative freedom law." So yeah, I mean, we are at least for myself. I think you as well. Like, I'm 100% for creative freedom. I don't think anyone should be preventing any content that is legal. Right? It's not putting anything illegal, obviously in the content, but I think that our society is getting to the point where they're normalizing certain content and it's almost tainting the space. And I guess the best example would be Kickstarter when you go on there and you go to the popular or the currently funding campaigns, and I mean a high percentage is got to have censor blocks over it. It's like, well, that sure could reinforce the stereotype that indie comics is filled with smut or lacking originality, because there's nothing original about just overt nudity or sexualization. um, and like I was saying, like, it's not even really that edgy these days. Yeah, it was 40 years ago, but not so much today. It's been so normalized. And I'm glad that mainstream comics haven't went down that same path. They have their own issues and things that they've pushed, of course, but I just don't think it's a good look on the indie space when it's kind of becoming consumed with certain types of content versus, well, just original creative works, which those types of works were the foundation of the medium.
I well said. First of all, I'm a bit more radical.
Mhm,
I think there's a difference between freedom and liberty.
mhm,
I don't think freedom is a net good. I think liberty is. I
mhm,
think people do have responsibility and people should have dignity for themselves. People like can do whatever they want, but not really. I mean, we have laws for a reason, and so I'm not saying that we should have laws to stop this. I think we should have an internal and communal dignity.
mhm, mhm,
I'm okay with people being shamed for things. Like if I do something stupid, I should be shamed. We got this thing. We get women cheering on like a woman killing her babies, right? Um, and like that's happening in our world right now. And it's like, oh, like she has no responsibility. When it's like, no, you like people who do that, who murder their children, and people who excuse that should be publicly shamed. Now, bringing it back to indie comics, I'm not saying start drama and shame people. I'm saying I think artists, I think an artist, I think that term has been polluted. I think people think that artist means weird guy that sits in his room and has a drug addiction and is somehow magically a genius. And it's like, no, Kurt Cobain kind of personified that idea. But if you know music and you know music history and you know Kurt Cobain, that dude spent like years perfecting his art. He was not a great guitar player, but he was a magnificent artist and he was a wonderful songwriter. And he did not write those songs accidentally. He was
mhm,
obsessed. And he had an internal integrity, and quite frankly, that integrity is probably what made him kill himself if he did do that.
mhm,
Because he struggled so much with the idea of success and not deserving it because he knew like what a bad musician he was, though he was a good artist. All that to say, at least the heroin junkie who may or may not have blown his brains out had a sense of integrity about his art.
mhm,
And he was so in touch with what I would call the divine that he understood you don't get that term artist, you have to earn it.
mhm,
And all that to say, I think that that is when I see something when I see that being abused, it just makes me sick. And I'm not going to tell people like don't do this, but I will comment on it and critique it.
mhm,
And that's the thing about freedom is it if you want to say freedom is it cuts both ways. You're free to do something and people are free to ridicule it.
mhm. Yeah, and I've been very consistent in what I'm about to say, but if folks want to go back to 2024 when I did a stream where the title was, what is smut, where we just basically
Yeah.
reviewed the definition and asked questions. I said there, and I'll say now, like, I don't think it should be illegal to make this type of content. I simply do not like it. Simply not my cup of tea. Now, even though I don't think it should be illegal to make it, I do believe that society should do its best effort to prevent it from getting in the hands or getting in front of, kids or young
Yeah.
teenagers, for example. Going back to the example of, hey, Blockbuster had a blocked off area. When you went to gas stations and bookstores, like that stuff was covered up, and you know, someone under the age of 18 or whatever wouldn't be able to buy it, just like cigarettes, right?
Hmm.
Obviously, that's very difficult with the internet, but I do think that these creators and these websites that host this material, they need to do their due diligence to try to minimize that as much as possible. Um, and yeah, I do think that this type of content, especially on the sexualized side of things, is contributing to the downfall of our society and our culture. The violence, the horror stuff, again, I'm not even a fan of horror films,
Yeah.
mind you, or horror content. I'm just not. I was into it when I was like a high schooler, but then after I went through some horrific situations in my life, it suddenly felt more real to where I'm like, I don't want to view that or even comprehend why those creators or how they
Yeah.
could, picture this stuff. You know what I mean? So it's just not my cup of tea. But most people are able to basically have that realization, like, yeah, this stuff is not real. It's just over the top. But the sexualized stuff does different things, especially to a young person's brain, that could have some long-term negative effects. Whereas I don't think a lot of people go watch a horror film or read a horror comic and then try to emulate those things. Uh, and I think it's easier for parents to teach their kids to separate that content from reality, right? And to be
Yeah.
able to teach that, like, hey, doing violent things are bad. Um, and then in terms of, let's say, vigilante content, uh, I think it can be used positively to, again, add that dramatic effect and realism to enhance the fact that they're going above and beyond to stop bad people. That's the core, though, of the purpose and of the story, is that they are stopping bad people. That is their goal. Uh,
Yeah.
Anti-heroes, yeah, it's hit or miss, but so that's why I don't have an issue with a violent Batman. I don't have an issue with the Batman that Snyder portrayed, for example. That's just that's what a vigilante would face and need to be like in reality to stop the worst of the worst. So yeah.
I agree. Well, this isn't self promo, but I wrote an article on Substack about it was called male power fantasies are good, actually. Clickbait title, forgive me.
Mhm.
But in it, I explain like how even children can instantly determine who's a bad guy, who a villain is, and the villain is who
Mhm.
attacks women and children. That's it. Or a dog, an animal. And but if you dig deeper into that, children get that. If you dig deeper, what it is a villain or a bad person is someone who, and this might be Jordan Peterson-y, but it's who wields power in the wrong way. It's a person who wields violence and sex in the wrong way. A villain uses violence to enforce their will upon the world for their own good. A
Mhm.
hero uses violence to oppose that. And
Mhm.
not just that, they use it against the state of nature. Like, you can't be a farmer and not kill some wolves and some snakes. It's
Mhm.
just going to
Mhm.
happen. And
Mhm.
that's why you're a farmer. That's why you're a shepherd. One of the best lines I thought from a movie, especially over this topic, is from The Patriot, where they're recruiting people and the pastor signs up and they're like, why, where's he going? And he looks at him and he's like, sometimes I forget, I'm going to butcher the line, but he says a shepherd tends the flocks and sometimes chases off wolves.
Mhm.
And it was a great line. Going to go fight the British. It's a little a little post 9/11. I get it, but it's a great line.
Hmm.
And all that to say, the same thing with sex is like it's something that if is wielded wrong in the let's say in the case of a grape, because I don't want you to get too banned on here on YouTube.
Hmm.
That's an obvious situation, but it's also when used irresponsibly, like it is fire. It is this regenerative or generative factor. It is the generative force. It's how you get things and make new things. And if you use it inappropriately, especially in a society, it's going to burn things. There's no way to like put it because like, and I'm kind of pushing back. I'm not arguing. Lucky Tub Publishing said, but porn and erotica has always been a part of art. Like, it actually hasn't. I would say maybe sex in the grand scheme, in the divine scheme. I would say yeah. Porn, no. Erotica, not really either. Those may have been in like parts of pagan art, but even the pagans, when they built idols, like sex god idols, are nothing with how you'll see like porn today. Like they accentuated certain things, like you'd have like a 12-foot statue with like a 4-foot wang, or you'd have like a fertility goddess with like massive hips and boobs, and there's a lot of ramifications with this. Like now we're discussing pagan rituals, and it's like, why did they worship fertility gods? Like, well, they also sacrificed children. Well, they all, and a lot of them had like horrific, actions with children and each other, and these weren't societies you wanted to emulate. In fact, part of colonization was people like Christian nations, if you have to use that term, going to trade with people and realizing these cultures, we can't abide this. Like the
Hmm.
way they treat people and the way they treat each other, that's one reason they started colonization. It wasn't just for like resource extraction. It was because they saw horrific things happening and were like, we can't in good conscience let this happen. They're sacrificing children to these fertility gods and stuff.
Hmm. Kind of the opposite of what our government does today. It's like, hey, we see poppy seeds, we see oil.
Yeah, right.
We're going to ignore the horrible things happening to people in our own
Well,
country.
I think it was it Israel that used pornography as a weapon. I think they like
Probably.
whenever they first like I think they when they first started like pushing into Gaza like years ago, they started broadcasting porn to like the TVs because they knew it would weaken the male population and cause division. And that's psychological warfare, and I doubt they're the first ones to use it, but
Hmm.
it's fire. I don't know what to tell you, man. It's the generative property. It's this thing that for all of human history has been recognized as either sacred or dangerous, and we just think that everything's everything now, and everything's
Hmm.
anything, and it's not. I'll get off my soapbox.
So Johnny Torch says, if I may, that's why stuff like superheroes not killing is a positive thing, because people pick up on these vigilantes going outside the law, yet having a moral law they must uphold. So I'm torn on that. I think to me it kind of depends on the setting. This, and I think it's situational. But for example, my character, um, you know, folks that have read my novels and know, like,
Mm-hmm.
my character cannot kill any human with a soul. So he
Yep.
has a unique kill rule. So I frame the story in a way that humans could lose their humanity, ultimately their soul, and those humans were fair play in terms of being killed. But that's because they didn't have a place on this earth because they were soulless. So that was my way of injecting a little bit of edginess to allow my character to kill, but only as a last resort, and only because it would save people. If basically if he didn't kill them, you know, others would be
Yeah.
killed, and he's in a society like Sin City where the police are corrupt, and where if he hands that criminal over to the police, well, the police will just use them for their own bidding, and the police are out there doing horrific things as well. So it depends on how the society and the scenario is framed in the story. But like for Batman, I don't want him to be like a killing machine. However, I'm okay with him killing the Joker. Reason being, he knows that, no matter what Commissioner Gordon does, no matter what the good cops do, he'll eventually get out and he'll eventually continue to do what he does just based on history, right? So
Mhm.
I'm okay with him crossing that line if he does not become what he hates or what he's fighting. So I think there's a fine line. Superman, yeah, he shouldn't be killing humans. I'm okay if he kills Zod, genocidal maniac, for example. But yeah, I do think that that most heroes, it, at the very least, it should be a last resort. Um, I do think there should be superhero movies and content that's like Dark Knight Returns, that's more adult oriented, and then you have other adaptations and characters that it's the opposite, right? It's more Superman, it's more geared towards kids and the lighter side of things. So, yeah, that's kind of my take on that. But I understand where you're coming from for sure.
My take on the Batman no kill rule is that it's in the context of story, it's brilliant. It gives him something most people don't have. It also points to his weakness, which he recognizes, which adds to his brilliance. He knows. I'm not. It's not the "I won't stop" thing. It's that he knows how capable he is, and he knows how like weak he is. He knows that he could get super emotional. People forget this. The reason, or they don't know it, the reason Batman is so cold and logical is because he's so passionate.
Mhm,
Like, he is the weeping child for his parents, and he has built everything, including the cape and cowl, over that, and he knows it. And that's
mhm,
his great strength, is knowing his weakness, and that was Tower of Babel. Um,
mhm,
for people who've read that, he can pick out weakness because he knows the weakness in himself.
mhm.
So, and part of it is Batman. This is we gotta have modern saviors on here. I gotta get you guys on my channel together to talk about this. But um, Batman is a mythological figure, and he's a specter, and he is the Dark Knight. And what that means is he doesn't kill the Joker because he wants Gotham to see what the Joker is capable of if they don't do it, because he's not always going to be there. If they don't, he's almost like this biblical angel figure, where like a divine punishment as well, where okay, I'm just a man and I've become an idea, but people have to take up that idea. Gotham has to change, and it won't change if Batman kills the Joker. Because Batman's going to die one day, and there's going to be another Joker.
Mhm,
If Gotham does not realize we have to do this, we have to become better and police our own society, then these mythical forces of chaos and order are just going to go back and forth in the extremes. You're going to have the Kingdom Come Batman that locks down everything, or you're going to have the Joker burning everything down.
mhm,
That's the thing, is he is the Dark Knight. He's there to save. He goes outside the laws to go bring them back into the fold. But he also does not kill, because he's the duality of the punishment. It's This is going to keep happening as long as you allow it.
mhm.
And this sounds pretentious, but hey, we're on the Smug channel, right? So like, so if you, I'm not trying to be mean, but if you don't read myths, particularly biblical ideas, you wouldn't understand this idea of, or see this idea of Batman functioning as both
Mhm,
like savior and judge of
mhm.
Gotham. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, that's where, Batman and Superman are obviously drastically different is because Superman has the ability to police the police if he wanted to, right? He could make sure there's no corrupt police officers. He could make sure they all get exposed because of his superhuman abilities. Whereas Batman, he doesn't have that power or control. No amount of money is going to give him control over the police. And so the police they're always going to be a weak spot, right? Because there's always going to be
Yeah.
corrupt ones and there's always going to be gaps, which is where Batman may face that situation where he could need to kill, of course, in a more adult version of a comic or film. whereas Superman really shouldn't need to. Uh, but again, as you know, I like how they framed him with Snyder, and to where he had that impossible situation where he had to kill in order to save humans, but he was killing an alien, not a human. So
Well,
I love how they put him in that situation to
well, that's
basically
part
choose
of it.
humans over his own kind.
Yeah, I mean, it's an angel destroying another angel.
Right.
It's or
Yeah.
destroying a demon.
Hmm.
It's this idea of course Superman. Of course, that's what Superman has to kill. Like, of course, it's Zod. He doesn't kill humans, but he'll kill Zod. Like, well, why? Because Zod's like him. That's why. It's not a disadvantage,
Hmm.
and it's not a He's also like he's the last son of Krypton. He's also the last judge and jury and executioner of Krypton. I
That's true.
mean,
Yeah.
Krypton Krypton decided Zod's fate. Zod is on borrowed time. Zod is Satan in this idea. He
Hmm.
has been freed from his captivity to wage war on the earth. He is the
Hmm.
revelation serpent, and Superman is either the incarnate Christ or the angel Michael. And it's
Hmm.
like, no, your fate was already decided. You've been living on borrowed time. I'm executing you now. And
Yep.
he didn't want to do it. And there's a whole, there's a whole thing there. But it is this idea of like, and and like I said, modern saviors has pointed this out. Like Zod, if Zod was going to be stopped, he wanted to die. He's a soldier. He was genetically bred to be a soldier. He
True.
wants a soldier's
Right. It was
death.
all or nothing for him. It was because
Yeah,
he was, yeah, genetically created for that purpose. He could not go outside of that purpose. And so his purpose was to, right, basically ensure that, Krypton lived on. And he saw the only way of doing that was to terraform Earth, right, to kill the humans, sacrifice them to continue his race. But because Superman was ultimately a human in terms of his heart and his mind, he he chose humanity over an evil, basically version of a Kryptonian. So he didn't want humanity to have the same fate as the Kryptonians.
yeah, he's embodying the spirit of his father of saying we've made a mistake, and we've got
Hmm.
to stop it before it hurts other people.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think it's brilliant. I've been on record saying I think Man of Steel is probably one of the best Superman stories ever. It's definitely one of the best of
Hmm.
the past couple of decades. I think I don't know. I wouldn't change a thing about it.
Hmm. Same. So hey, well, Red, thanks for being here, man. So I don't have a comic yet. The sign up page is going to be happening here in a couple weeks for the first 60-page comic. However, I do have two novels. I'm not sure if you read
Which you
novels or
should
would
get.
want to review them, but if you do, I'll put the link here. And I did do a mini comic for the novels, which had Corey Barton art, as well as like a Joe Ball cover and a Skunk Artworks cover, to introduce each of the characters and depict a couple of the scenes from the novels, so that you could know key facts and figures about the characters and know what they look like, so that you can uh, picture them as you're reading the story. So I don't have the mini comic available like for physical form anymore, but if you do want to read the novels by chance, I'll definitely send you the digital version of the mini comic for free. And uh, but yeah, it would definitely get you primed and ready for the comic. So and I have a feeling you'll really like the comic and the art for sure. So
And well
yeah.
read. Take it from someone who's read the book. It's and this is a compliment. It's written very much like a comic book strip. It's
Hmm.
very vivid. The descriptions are there, and I don't know. It's quick to the point. It's punchy. I would if you like comics, pick it up. I don't get paid by B. I don't get a commission for saying that.
So yeah, go ahead and shoot me a DM, well read on Twitter, and send me your email address, and I'll send you over the mini comic for sure. It's like 15 pages of art, again with character introductions and all of that. And yeah, all the art was done by Corey. Um, I know you're familiar with him from Kozar and all of that, but he won't be doing the comic, but you'll definitely recognize the artist for that. And it's the art style is just perfect for the comic adaptation. So yeah,
Thank God it's
but yeah,
not Rob
appreciate it, man.
Liefeld.
Yeah, no disrespect towards him, but not my cup of tea. I mean, to be honest, most art is not my cup of tea for my comic.
Yeah.
You could throw so many mainstream comic names, past and present, at me, and I would still choose my artist over them.
Yeah.
Even though their names, I'm sure, could bring me more funding and all that, but unless it's prime Frank Miller, or Dale Keown or Bernie Wrightson, right? Somebody like that. Uh, I needed a specific tone and style for my comic, and I got it. So I'm super pumped for that. So, but yeah, there'll be plenty of preview pages on the sign up page. Most of the ones I've shown on here the last couple weeks, and then I'll have more to some new ones to show as well. But yeah, beyond excited to start get some traction on that. And I have talked with Patrick Quinlan a little bit more, and I think we're going to try to start maybe working on the audio book version of the novels here in the last couple months of the year, and then maybe get that launched and out to people before I launch the comic. So yeah.
It's a good style. It fits the narrative perfectly. I agree.
Mm,
You're writing kind of a gritty neo noir
mhm,
with a mythic side of things, especially like a dark mythic side of things. I think the art matches it great. The artist has a great modern style, but it also has a, I would say, like kind of indie '90s style.
mhm,
Particularly like if you, I think of something like Cerebus, particularly like the backgrounds.
mhm.
Whenever he started getting, I forget the guy's name, like the guy that started doing the backgrounds for him. Um, it's got a really good depth to it. I'd say I think you guys are gonna like it. I haven't seen anything beyond what you guys have seen, but I mean the vibe I get is that BA's a dedicated guy despite the smugness, and he's the one guy in indie comics that's in shape, which means he's disciplined, which means he likes aesthetics and he knows how to get them.
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, for me, like, and people will see it in the comic. Like, I wanted this blend of kind of Frank Miller style art, but then extreme detail from time to time, whether it's in backgrounds or, especially when it comes to faces. Like, I really like very detailed faces so that I can use expressions, show versus tell. Like, that really helps save a lot of space for dialogue and internal monologue. And so my artist is able to get the heavy inks and that feel of Frank Miller art with a lot of beautiful silhouettes, but then just have some insanely detailed backgrounds and characters. So it's yeah, that's why I've waited as long as I have, and I've been as patient as I have in terms of getting the first comic done, because to me, waiting for the art that fit it was way more important than having more books done, and just not feeling super proud of the books I put out. So,
Oh yeah, you've got to have that sense of accomplishment and that
mm,
quality. I mean, and the thing is, like that stuff doesn't go away, and that's what kind of this is a whole other topic, but it's what we've always lived by with indie comics. Like people will rush and rush and rush for expediency, and it's like that thing that you made is going to live forever.
mhm,
Um, it's not even if it's not on the internet forever, which it will be. It's going to exist like in your heart and in your mind that you made that, and if
mhm,
you're not proud of it, you're gonna always live with that.
yep. Yep, for sure. Yep. So yeah, actually going back to the topic around, edginess in indie comics and in general, I definitely recommend folks read the Push to the Wall book by Frank Miller, and also the recent film documentary American Genius on him, because he he really lays things out in an appropriate manner, in my opinion, in regards to just balancing the shack value, balancing edginess. And one of the I want to read one of the statements he had in there, where he says, pushing the wall in bold provocation and quietly honing your craft are not mutually exclusive impulses. The opposite is true. They often work hand in hand, and in most cases, if you have one without the other, you really won't have anything. So, a quick stop there. To me, that's him saying, like, if you focus solely on being edgy or going over the top or going over the wall instead of just pushing it, you would be sacrificing what makes the craft beautiful. You'd be sacrificing story, characters, and the art itself. And I just really like how he phrased that. Like, and I translated that as, you have to have balance. They can complement one another, but if you only go in one direction, at least for me personally, in regards to edginess, you're going to end up sacrificing something, which overall will impact the quality of the book.
Oh, absolutely. You have to have light and shade, and
Hmm.
that's how painters describe it, and that's how if you ever watch like some documentaries on Led Zeppelin, that's how Jimmy Page described their music. You have to have light, darkness, contrast.
Hmm.
That's what brings dynamism. I mean, that's the divine male, divine feminine. That's order, chaos. That is something that has been missing for a long time. And again, I always say this. I'm a music guy, a music nerd. Um, but that was lost. I think first in music is when everything started being like glued to a click track, glued to a grid, turned up to 11. The loudness wars in particular. If people don't know that, it's basically when mass compression started, and it's why everything sounds so flat and dumb now. And it
Hmm.
literally was changing the sound waves. And what
Hmm.
it is, and I can't give a physical description because I got my camera off, but like sound waves, if you're not familiar, like audio waves, they have peaks and they have lows. They have dynamics. They're just natural dynamics. What compression does is it pushes the lows up and the peaks down to
Hmm.
make all of it basically the same volume.
Hmm.
It literally kills dynamics, and that's what the same thing is. And that's kind of why I think people recognize this stuff in indie comics and modern comics and art in general. Is your body, against the holistic spiritual and body side of things, your body knows this. Your body knows and recognizes when something is being constrained and when something's off, when nature is being like bastardized. And that's what I think you're seeing is when you go so far into like basically porn with comics and you're trying to also say it's a story. It's like we you can tell the dynamics not there. You can tell the contrast is not there, and that
Hmm.
it all the differences have been erased.
Hmm. Yeah, and then, like, he goes further and he says, more than that, one can save you from indulging too much in the other. So again, if you are making sure that you still have a focus on the characters and the story itself, it'll prevent you from going over the top and indulging too much in the edgy side of things. Um, he says, but an over fixation on craft will zap the emotion from your work and slow you down, and the work will drift into a study of anatomy or architecture. So, yeah, I'm I know people that do that as well, right? They become a
Mm-hmm.
perfectionist to a point where nothing gets done. That's also can be negative. Um, he says, when one leads you astray or starts to bore you, lean on the other. Never forget, if you bore yourself, you're almost certainly boring everyone else. So he has some just phenomenal insight in that book. I highly recommend people to watch and read, in terms of those two, the film and the book. So.
Yeah, and that's important. That's very important. The idea of I don't know, again, differences. Always compare. Like hierarchy exists for a reason. Hierarchy exists so that things with roles can be great in those roles. You don't like. There's this. I know I'm rambling, but you have kids. There's been this thing for like 20 or 30 years now. It's like you want your kid to be a leader, and it's like no, you don't. You want your kid to be good at what they're good at, because the world needs very, 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 very few leaders, and the leaders that are good are the ones that get out of the way of the talented people. And that hierarchy exists so that leaders basically are out of the way, and that other people aren't leading.
Mhm.
All that to say, like, art is kind of like a fireplace, and the church is kind of like a fireplace, and marriage is like you have the stones which hold things together, and then you have the fire, which is like the divine feminine. If you don't have the stones, the fire burns everything. If you don't have the fire, you just have cold stones.
Mhm.
That's art. If you don't have that contrast, if you don't have that hierarchy, you get the worst of both worlds.
Yep.
And give me a second. I gotta check on the kid. I'll be right back.
Yep. You're good. So, Lucky Tub Publishing says, "What is a modern example of going over the wall in your mind? Anything mainstream in books or even non-modern example?" So, I had mentioned earlier in terms of indie comics, if you go to Kickstarter, there's just stuff that's just over the top, just overly sexualized. That's just leaning into absurdity, really. So there's a lot of that in indie comics, which I think reinforces some of the negative stereotypes around indie comics, lacking originality, creativity, such things. But in terms of mainstream, I would say things like The Boys, especially the TV show. Right, that's a show where I just had absolutely no interest in watching because there's so many clips where it just delved into just being straight perverted to where you're like, okay, this is supposed to be about, obviously edgy anti-heroes or whatever. But it's like they're leaning too much into being over the top and that shock value versus focusing on the core story. Now, the story and just that, type of anti-hero is not my cup of tea anyways, but yeah, just some of the stuff I saw to me is over the top. I'd say the same thing actually about um Game of Thrones. I think at the core of it, it's very intriguing, and I think there's a lot to like about it. But the fact that they, had to go into and show, things that would be like incest and whatnot. There's just too much of that to where you're like, it's just not something that you could like comfortably watch with your wife, right? If they're a conservative, for example, to where it just kind of taints the overall story, in my opinion. So I do think some of that stuff in film and TV, especially, is over the top. A good, you know, contrast comparative would be like Westworld, for example. Like looking at the plot and the trailer and whatnot, you're like, man, I'd really like to watch this. It's got Jonathan Nolan tied to it as like the showrunner, creator. He's a brilliant writer, but they, to me, went over the top in regards to sex scenes, to where it's just like, I'm not going to bother. On the flip side, right, he created Person of Interest. Person of Interest was able to have an extremely intriguing and exciting TV show without any of that content, right? So to me, that over edginess of Westworld doesn't make it better. If anything, it pushes part of the market away versus Person of Interest, which can be, that teenagers could even watch. So yeah. So Punkface XO 6066 says, with censorship these days, it's good to still have a wide variety of content, um, but it's not going to last. Yeah. Mm. So Lucky Tub Publishing says, isn't Over the Wall needed, especially for something like The Boys when it's a parody of the genre? I would say yes, maybe in terms of the humor or the violence, but I don't think in terms of the sexualization. I don't think that that's necessary. Another good example would be Rebel Moon. Okay, decent film. You had the standard film or release, and then you had the director's cut. I enjoyed the standard cut. Not the best film, not the best writing by any means of Snyder's, but it didn't go over the top to where it was like uncomfortable to watch with somebody else. The director's cut, however, to me, it tried too hard to be edgy, over the top in terms of the sex scenes and even the torture and the brutality to where it's just like, okay, this is not enhancing the story. It's like he just threw it in there for that shock value, but it didn't do anything positive for the film. So that's like another example to me of where you had, you know, the standard cut versus the director's cut, um, where the director's cut didn't really benefit the story for the most part, versus
Yeah.
Batman versus Superman, Watchmen. It actually enhanced it. It added more context and story, versus just edginess.
Well, and I think it also, like, maybe it's personal. Like, I'm not a fan of Garth Ennis. I think
Mhm.
Garth Ennis has a good writer in him somewhere, and he lets his cynicism and his, I don't know, maybe ego get in the way. Preacher
Mhm.
was well written for like 2 or 3 volumes and then turned to crap. The
Mhm.
Boys, again, like, he's a competent storyteller, but he's almost a victim of the age he was in. I think he's a
Mhm.
better storyteller than Mark Millar,
Mhm.
but I think Mark Millar reins it in better. And
Mhm.
that's the thing, is like, yeah, it's a parody, but that's the thing. Like, that, again, that's the holistic thing I'm trying to articulate, and I probably need to find a better way to articulate it, and that's why I like these talks with you guys. A parody, kind of in the hierarchy of art, is a little bit lower because it's derivative. It's a commentary. It's a critique. Like, it's that's not the same. That's not even a deconstruction. You
Mhm.
see what I'm saying? It's so it gets away with stuff because, yeah, you don't take it as seriously because you can't, because from its source.
Mhm. Yeah, and like the Preacher TV show, that was one that I don't know if I finished it or not, but it was like on that borderline of like enjoyable, but then there was just some scenes where like, really, did you have to go to that extent?
Yeah,
Um, you know, but the overall story was interesting. They had great casting and it was funny. It's just, similar to, in my opinion, Westworld and stuff, like they put certain scenes in there to where it's like it's just not necessary.
yeah.
Um, to go
Well,
that over the top.
if you used too much red in a painting, people would be able to know. For
Hmm.
some reason, when it comes to story elements, people don't. You see what I'm saying? Like, when it comes to like things like that, it's like we're supposed to treat like sexual interactions or violence, whatever you want to call it, or even like basically anything that's a part of a visual medium, and we're supposed to treat it as if it's different from the technical side, and it's not. Again, I'm not trying to beat this term. It's just it's eating away at my brain so I can articulate it. Art is holistic. It's not the sum of its parts. It's beyond the sum of its parts. And
Hmm.
again, if you had a painting where there was too much shading in a place, or you had a run-on sentence when you were reading a novel, you would know it. And that's no different from having a scene that goes on too long, or it's got too short, or is too graphic. There's something about immersion and beauty and shock that all go together. And when you go too far in something, like, even if you linger on something for far too long that's good, it's like looking at the sun too much. You see what I'm saying?
Hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so real quick on the very last Starfighter says Westworld isn't trying to be edgy. It's making a statement about how we use exploitation for entertainment. I agree to an extent, but like you don't need to have full male nudity to do that, right? Like, to me, it's bad enough having the female nudity, but like when the shows have like full male nudity, it's just like there's just absolutely no reason for that. I mean, period. I mean, that does
Well,
not.
even South Park made a joke about it with Game of Thrones. Like, yeah, all the wieners are floppy. Like they have
Mm-hmm,
to show up.
mm-hmm.
They have to show a flaccid wiener because they want to show a wiener, but they can't show it erect. And it's like it's what's the worst of both worlds.
Mm-hmm. Like, and I'll even say that about the 300 comic, right?
Yeah,
Like, yes, back then, because of how those societies were, yeah, I'm sure they were just walking around like that. But at the same time, it just like you didn't need to just put the loincloth on 'em. Like, it was unnecessary. Luckily, it wasn't like graphic, right? It was like barely even recognizable with Frank
yeah.
Miller's art style, but like there's just absolutely no reason to have that in film or TV, in my opinion. Just none at all. Um,
Well, there's
so
also a
yeah.
difference between stagnation and movement. I mean, that's the thing with like people will post like Michelangelo's David or something. It's like, yeah, it's a statue. There's so like jiggle physics are weird for certain parts of the body.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. It's like, yeah, I don't know. It's like why would you want to risk, you know, to some regard making a part of your audience so uncomfortable that they may not even try to watch it, based
Yeah,
on
it breaks immersion.
reviews, right? Or during it. It's like it just doesn't enhance it. And there's been so many TV shows and films that have done that where it's like even 90% of the film completely okay, but then there's that like 10 or even 3% where you're just like, oh, why did they do that? Like just completely unnecessary. And that's where, an example, again, one of my favorite creators, Christopher Nolan, right? Similar to his brother Jonathan. Like, not necessary at all to have the nudity and sex scenes in Oppenheimer. Didn't enhance the movie at all, just made it awkward. Uh, but luckily, it was such a small portion of it, um, that the overarching story made it, worth watching. But I love that the fact in Odyssey, he had an R-rated film, right? He had a film that took place way back then, similar, to 300, where he really could have pushed that limit. He could have showed a lot of stuff, but he decided not to, and I appreciated that. Like, I appreciated that it just stuck to more realistic, gore and violence from that time, and shied away from the sexual side of things because it really does not ever enhance the story at all.
And to you might pull out the very last Starfighter's comment again.
Yeah.
Yep. And this isn't me. Two things. This isn't me arguing you Starfighter. I think people who argue the chat, I think that's dumb. And second of all, I don't know you. And I don't take this offensively. But what I'm saying is this statement of like making a statement about how we use exploitation for entertainment. I find that argument weak. I'm not saying you're making it. I'm just saying I find that argument weak because that's an argument that is always used to put it's a shield, I think, for what people are doing. I think it's, as long as people can frame something as a critique or a statement, they can hide behind it. And it's like, well, that's not what art is. Again, art is more than a statement. Art is an expression of truth. Art is an expression of the unexpressible. It's not just a political or social comment. There's a horror movie called Funny Games, where these two boys, if you don't know it, you can check it out. I guess I think it was Swedish or something, and then they made an American version of it where these two guys, young guys, go and they throughout the movie they torture and brutally kill a family. And the infamous scene, I don't care if this spoils it for people, whatever. The infamous scene at the end is the dad or the son or somebody escapes, kills one of them, and he's going to kill the other one and save his family when suddenly one of the bad guys pauses the movie, looks at the audience, pushes the rewind button on like a button, rewinds it back to where like the kid escaped, and then plays it again and then kills them. And the whole thing is it's a wink wink to you're bad for watching horror movies. Isn't society terrible? Here's a comment on the exploitation. And we're not doing anything wrong. We're just holding a mirror to society. And it's like, okay, got it. But yeah, funny games. That's it, guys. But that doesn't tell me anything. That's not you bettering society. That's you wallowing in it and using it to promote your thing. It's so juvenile. And like again, Starfighter, I'm not saying you're making that argument, and I'm not even saying that Westworld is, but I'm saying I find that argument of making a statement on society, I find it kind of weak, if I'm being honest, and it's because of that, especially when it's done wallowing in the very thing that they are critiquing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because that show, the plot of it, the casting, the writer, all of that stuff makes me really want to watch it. But the fact that there's a lot of nudity, including male nudity, I'm just like, that's not something. My wife is not gonna like that or appreciate that. So like, yeah, it's just like, why did you need to do that? And I think it was
But
because it was on probably HBO and they wanted that shock value, but it's like it's just completely unnecessary.
see, what
Yeah.
you just said is very important. What you said is, I don't think my wife would appreciate that. And a lot of people on the internet that are stupid would take that as, oh, BA answers to his wife.
Mhm.
No, BA is one with his wife.
Oh, it's also
And she,
uncomfortable to me because I don't wanna
yeah,
see male nudity,
well,
period.
that too. But what I'm saying is, you're not an atomized individual. And
Yep.
that goes back to what I was talking about, the problem with what we have to call capitalism and freedom versus liberty. The founding fathers did not believe in abstract freedom. They believed in liberty. They didn't believe people were atomized individuals. That is like a far more new liberal idea.
Mhm.
They believed in community. They believed people owed something to other people, especially their family and their nation. And what you're saying is this thing is not only not good for me, it's not good for my family. Ergo, it's not good for my community. It's not good for my nation. It's not good for the world.
Yeah, and this comment actually really brings up a really good thought here. You know, Punkface says, "I can't wait for streaming platforms to have a system to let us select our own level of censorship to toggle on or off explicit scenes or violence." And see, that function would be fantastic, right? If you wouldn't have to even think about needing to fast forward through a scene, right, where it could automatically trim that, because you know what, you're probably not going to miss much of the story, right? If you just cut out 10 seconds here, 10 seconds there. But at the same time, the filmmakers, the folks that are TV showrunners, why not have a clean version like they did with music back in the day? You know what I mean? Like back then, albums would have a clean version and an explicit version. That way, they could still have, different age ranges listen to the music and they could still capture the sales from it. It was actually very smart. And I don't understand why they don't do that for film and TV. Because yes, you're just trimming, or yes, those couple scenes, okay, you have a clothed version or whatever, right? For like Westworld, for example, you clothe the robots, which are, played by actors. You would automatically gain a larger share of the audience by doing that. And I don't understand why they don't go back to that same approach. And they could do the same thing with comics, I guess, to an extent. It's just different because obviously it takes more time and effort to draw a comic and all that, to make different versions. But yeah, it'd be really cool if the platforms could do that. But I think it'd be even better if the filmmakers, the production houses would make different versions so that people could choose if they want to have the super edgy explicit version, or hey, I want to have a cleaner version so that it's more comfortable to watch with, your teenage kid, or, with your wife, for example. Or Otherwise you're just going to not watch it at all in this example.
I agree. Well, I just think standards should be higher, if I'm being honest. I think there's just a baseline for these things for the general population, and we've pushed them to the extremes for the extremes for too long. I think it's the same thing. Like people can understand woke, right? People can understand like, hey, we shouldn't let people like call themselves a boy or a girl just because they think they are. Why? Because well, it's kind of like stretching a rubber band too much. It stretches society too much. It's the same thing. I think standards just have to come back. And Last Starfighter, I don't think it's using as an analogy and an excuse to show it. I think it's just wallowing. I think it's offering nothing. I think it just turns everything up to 11, thinking it's offering a commentary, thinking it's offering help when it's doing nothing. It's like, let's say your house is kind of dirty, and someone comes in and starts wrecking it. And it's like, well, what? You're living in filth. And it's like, well, you're not helping. You're making it worse. Like your criticism and the way you did it did not offer anything. In fact, it just added to it. That's what I'm trying to say. And I don't know. To me, it's just it's a heart problem. It's a spiritual problem, and I think most people don't. I think I agree with you, B. I think you're right. I think most people want that kind of standard back. I
Mm.
think we've let
Or at
the
least an
extremes be
option.
super low. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think we've let the extremes dictate reality for too long.
Hmm. Yeah. So comic books cookie says, I agree. Nudity or love scenes shouldn't be there at all. What can these mainstream actors do better than specialized pros on the hub? To
Ugh.
each, their own career. But I agree. I mean, there's just it doesn't improve the film at all. I really, really appreciate films where and they do this in Reacher, for example. Reacher's been a fantastic show. It hasn't had to have that. It's got the edginess in terms of violence, right, and and brutality, which I'm fine with. It fits the story. It fits the character, but they haven't needed to delve into the nudity. They just have, they basically imply like, okay, yeah, these characters are going to have sex. That's all you need to know. Okay, it happened. Boom. That's it. That's like you
Yeah.
just need the implication and then move on to the next scene. And I appreciate that show has done a good job doing that. Um, and that's a show for adults. Like they could have went the route of introducing a bunch of nudity and all that, but they didn't because they didn't want to kneecap themselves and lose a chunk of the audience. So, which was smart.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I love 300. I agree. I think even like the sex scene between him and his wife is a little too much. And
Hmm.
but to contrast it, I think the way they presented Xerxes' chamber was great. I
Hmm.
mean, it could have maybe it could be a little. It's more excessive in my head than when I actually watch it, because the whole
Hmm.
point is that Xerxes is this decadent pagan king, and
Hmm.
he's a Satan representation, offering the world, to,
Hmm.
to different people. He offers it to Leonidas, that's Christ being tempted in the desert. Then he offers it to, I forget his name, but the hunchback who's the Judas figure.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it that works because it's like, okay, it's showing a seedy, terrible thing. Look how gross this is what it's saying. And it's doing it properly in the light of you want this to lose. And I think that works. I mean, one of my favorite films was the American version of Girl with a Dragon Tattoo. But again, and that probably could tone back some of the nudity, but the way it does it again is of course there's grape scenes in it which are horrific and hard to watch, but even the way those are done and the normal sex scene, there's this undercurrent of like wrongness, of
Hmm.
darkness. And
Hmm.
that's the point. That's the point. It's a contrast of it, and I think it does it well. I think it probably could have toned it down a little bit, but again, the holistic idea of intent matters.
Hmm. Yeah. So the very last Starfighter says you wrote something, right, BA? What scenes of violence can be taken out of your book without ruining it? I think think there's quite a few that actually could be taken out without compromising the story and the character development. Um, I think I could definitely tone them down and reduce the brutality and have the same statement applied. Um, for me, I don't really. I mean, you could give me your thoughts, as a impartial reader, Dan, but I didn't
Yeah.
really have anything over the top. Like for the intro where, hey, clearly this woman, like she's, about to be violated, like it's just implied, like, hey, it's gonna happen. I didn't need to show anything. Because that's something I did not want to show. To me, that was enough. But then of course I did have my hero, beat the shit out of him and then some. But to me, I wanted to show that extent of the violence because, well, that's what would happen between two humans in that situation. Um, my, a person would need to go to those levels of violence in order to stop that type of person. And you want that type of person to no longer have power or control or the ability to continue to do what he was about to do. But I could dumb it down and have it be more like a classic Batman story and still get the point across. But I didn't need to show any torture or over the top gore or express that. I tried to have a limit because I didn't want readers to be really uncomfortable or to think I was crazy. So,
Well, I think and if people haven't read it, they wouldn't know this. I mean, part of the violence is mostly thought. It's the intent because he's being compelled and he's fighting the darkness to do even worse things. Um, and that's part of it because he's having to will himself to act, and he's worried, like, are you going to let it out? Are you going to do this terrible thing?
mhm.
And I think
well,
that's the big thing. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say the unique thing too, as I mentioned earlier, was that the no kill rule essentially that my character has, like
Yeah,
he's celestial. I don't know how to phrase this. Like because of his tie-in with divinity, he is literally prevented from killing a person with a soul. Even if
yeah,
part of him has that temptation, and I express that struggle from time to time where he's just like, this person shouldn't live. Like he is a horrible person. Like he has that what would be a normal human temptation when they're fighting somebody horrible or they're um confronted by someone of that nature, right? But his tie-in to divinity prevents that. So I show that struggle and that also restrain, and the reason why he's restrained, if that makes sense.
sure. And again, and it's that intent, when well expressed, is part of it. And I'm tying that together with Starfighter's latest comment here. If you could pull it up,
Mhm.
so everybody can see it. Whether it's necessary or not, I think artists write scenes that are meaningful and also fun. Censoring anything is getting rid of the author's intent. I'll push back just a little bit. The author's intent matters very little to the author's execution, because if the intent is not well executed, it doesn't matter. It's like saying a word and you say it wrong, you mispronounce it, or nobody hears it. Um, and same thing here. Like you wrote something like, "What scenes of violence can be taken out of your book without ruining it?" He did that. It was called editing. And the thing is, sometimes editing is bad, and that's what I'm trying to say. That just because a work of art has been published or is out, does not mean it was well edited. It does not mean it's above critique, or that it could have been better. And it's not about trying to stick to a subjective view. It is trying to stick to an objective view of, like, hey, let's look at reality, let's look at reaction, let's look at even emotion, and see, like, how could this be shaped to be better art. Not necessarily to make someone feel better or not to hurt someone, but how could this be better art? And something like The Boys, I think we could all agree, like, and like Game of Thrones, the early seasons are better than the later seasons. Well, it's no, especially The Boys, it's no surprise that part of the reason those later seasons are awful is because they get so gratuitous in the
Hmm.
worst way. The
Hmm.
first season was gratuitous, but it didn't feel that way because the world around it reacted a certain way. When a train runs through, funny phrasing, Huey's girlfriend and blows her up, it's shock. It's horrific because that's a terrible thing. When later it's just you're seeing bloodshed after bloodshed and gore and sex after sex, and there's no proper reaction to it, there's no proper space. The art itself is not reacting to how this thing should be reacted to. So it's we get hung up again on this idea of freedom and liberty and censoring and self-expression. I don't care as much as I do about art being good. And if something needs to go back to the cutting floor to be better, I don't call that censoring. I call that making it better.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like, I'm not promoting the idea of censorship here. I think, as long as it's legal, people should be able to make what they want to make. I do believe there should be restriction in terms of access, right? To prevent kids and whatnot from accessing things. But to my earlier point, like, I'd like at least the option to have a clean or tamed version of some of this stuff. And, I do think if that option existed, um, those films would have more of an audience. Because, I'll bet you boys could have had more viewers in those later seasons if they wouldn't have done that. I bet you they did lose viewers strictly because of that. And if they would have offered a tamer version, then, maybe they would have retained it. But I do think that certain works are just trying to push things over the top just to do it, not because it's what's best for the story, what's best for the audience, or even what's best for ratings or the money aspect
Mm-hmm.
of it. Uh, it's like they're just trying to be remembered for doing something wild versus creating the best story possible. Um, so yeah.
Well, I think there's a movie called Backwards. I could be wrong. Like, don't quote me. I'm gonna butcher it. I think it's a foreign film, and I always mess up the name but it starts with a grape, and it's a pretty gross, like gratuitous. It's not by today's standards. It's not, but it's uncomfortable. It's grossly uncomfortable because of what it is. And then the film works backwards from there to show like how that scene happened. And so what it does is it immediately shocks and then reconceptualizes.
Mhm.
And it doesn't apologize. It just says like here's like it's this cathartic, viscerally cathartic means of like hitting you and then pulling back, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
And that's just different. I don't know how to explain it. And like that's to me that's the beauty of art. Like I'm gonna go on a rant, but we live in a like scientific materialist world where we think that you have to a be able to understand everything and b explain everything, and it has to be explained in a way that is reasonable, in a way that we understand, and worse, a way that we can see and feel. That is not art. That is not the realm art functions in. And when you castrate the spiritual and the metaphysical and the mystery from art, you get the Ripaverse, quite frankly. You get crap. You get things that, of course, you can understand it and see it and feel it, and then nothing else from it. When instead it's like, no, you watch it and there's this feeling with it and there's this spirit with it that flows and it flows well and it's uninterrupted because it's well orchestrated. It's like a well-made symphony without a baby like burping in the middle of it. That's what I'm trying to say. Like there is room for loud timpanis. There's room for screeching violins or violence or sex if you do it right. You have to
Mhm.
build the song around the crescendo, if that makes sense. And that's what I'm trying to say. Um, well, and, like, not all art has to be transcendent. I get what is being said, but at the same time, everything has to be bought. All art is transcendent. That's what art is. That's what separates it from pornography. I'm not trying to be mean, but like that's what art is. Art is not just self-expression. Especially if we're material and meat, all you could express is like shit, basically, literally. You are more than the physical being that you are. What is the self? These are questions that have to be answered to say that. So all I'm saying is that there is room for things, but you have to do it well. That's all I'm saying.
So Johnny Torch says that brings up a good point over, what if I don't care if there are swear words, but I don't want nudity, or vice versa? Eventually, you should be able to have that level of choice, and that's where my stance is essentially. Like, I don't care, if they're swearing. However, the same, I apply the same rule. It gets to a point sometimes where they overdo it to where it distracts you from the story. It distracts you from the movie, from the comic, from the TV show, and it can become cringe. And there's a
Yeah.
lot of modern TV shows where they drop so many F bombs where you're like, okay, this is just unnatural. Like it's actually becoming kind of annoying. Whereas if you tastefully or if you have a balance and they're well placed, it can add that dramatic effect, right? But if it's constant, you lose that effect that that word can have, and sometimes the overuse of those words can take away from the effect of the scene itself and what's being portrayed in the scene. Whereas to me, the nudity doesn't do anything to enhance a scene, in my opinion, or a
Yeah.
story. So,
Well said. Um, Lucky Tub Publishing says, and who decides if it's being done well? What BA is saying is my feeling about the Matrix 2 rave scene personally. Well, to go with that, I mean, quite frankly, everybody agrees on the Matrix 2 rave scene kind of sucks because it breaks up the feeling of the story. It breaks up the spirit of the story. So it's not necessarily who decides, it's an objective idea. And part of being in a fallen world and being imperfect is that you can reach, and the beauty of it is that you can reach for the objective and the good and the true and the beautiful, these things that are beyond us. You will never fully capture them. You can't fully embody that divine beauty and truth, even in art. But you can, through the mystery of art, through your own feelings and through universal feelings, all these things together, and this is why I keep beating this word holistic, you can reach for this objectiveness. And that's what artists do. And like this was understood as art until, correct me if I'm wrong, BA, maybe 100 years ago, this was understood. Like, if you look at these paintings going back from, goodness, even Dali all the way back to even like the 13th, 12th century, you'll see the Fibonacci sequence. You'll see the spiral. You'll see that even if they didn't articulate it or know it yet, they did embody it. They knew how to structure things.
mhm.
And there's just there's an innate sense of when something works and when something doesn't. And a regular person if a regular person can just decide it or feel it, then what is an artist? An artist is a person who should be working towards understanding those feelings and perfecting them to embody them. Is Goya Saturn devouring his child sublime? It is sublimely made. Is it at least technically well done? We can argue whether it's degenerate or not. I think because of the conceptualization of it, he put it on a dark wall in his house. He kept it private. When we put it out, you could argue that maybe children shouldn't see it because it might handle themes that they can't understand. There's lots of dark things like that. It is technically well done. It's a beautiful piece of a pagan story. And he didn't do it for shock value. He did it. He didn't even do it for Saturn. We don't even know if he did. That's just the title the people who found it gave it.
Mm.
He was trying to embody a feeling and a sense that was not just him, that was beyond him. And the person who found it connected it to Saturn, to this archetype, to this myth, because it was so well done. What it wasn't was a random piece of artwork of someone just doing something atrocious.
Hmm.
You see what I'm saying? Like those elements are there even when we don't know the author's intent. They're still there. And this sounds like a cop out to our modern world, but this was how people thought of art until, like I said, about maybe 100 years ago. I'm not arguing with you, Lucky Tub Publishing. I'm just trying to articulate this point, and I'm glad that you're here and expressing these questions.
Yeah, that's one thing I like about. Well, I mean, that's clearly my interest in streaming is having just topical discussions, right? Getting that interaction with the chat to see what people's opinions are and bounce ideas and thoughts off of one another, versus other formats and avenues that streams can take. So it's always enjoyable, even if it's people that don't agree with you or have a different stance. Just having that conversation around topics like that, and how they tie into indie comics, because that's ultimately why we're all here, and that's our interest is comics and or films and TV. But it's just interesting to see folks interact and mingle on these topics. So
Well, these are the kind of things I've killed for indie comics for years now, because I get tired
mhm.
of like just drama or just, I don't know, like most comics aren't really worth talking about. Um, Lucky Tub, I'm going to push back hard on that. You would have to argue an eschatological point of view if you're going to argue that that's a natural thing that was going to occur. And that itself is a progressive view that was created and forced into academia. And what it is a rival religion. If you have a view of that's what was natural, what was going to occur, you have to present to me an eschatological teleology of history, which is what Marxism and progressivism did. We don't know what the natural bend of history is because we haven't lived it. Things like concepts don't naturally deconstruct. People do that or they don't do it. People conserve things, people change things. Again, if you read biblical narrative, if you read old history, things will decay if people allow them to, and they can be rebuilt. There is this idea, kind of maybe history having cycles. One or two people think about that, but it doesn't have to happen.
Well,
And like,
definitely, colleges and the education system, especially in terms of college itself, has deconstructed art, and
on purpose.
also, yeah, on purpose, and they've also prevented traditionalism and the conservation of a lot of things intentionally. And that's and you see that in films as well, and you see that, I mean, on both sides of the aisle with art, right? And this is actually, I wanted to address this topic. Lucky Tub also said that I think the boys lost view count due to more political takes it had and more woke aspects than anything about violence or sex. And see, a lot of these things can be approached in the same manner, right? Um, you see
Yes.
films where it's the woke aspects. You see films, comics, um, commentators, right, where they push the political stuff so far and they try to jam it down your throat that the story becomes worthless, because the story is just them pushing an ideology or a political stance, and they have deconstructed the purpose of storytelling and art in doing so. And that's a big issue with mainstream comics, and this is where that's my issue with indie comics, right, on the avenue of smut and the over sexualization of the comics, where it's distracting away from what made comics beautiful, what's made storytelling beautiful, and art itself, is that the focus is more on the edginess or how far they can push things versus the actual story or the art itself. I want to be surrounded by comics and films that the story and the art are the drivers. They're the focus,
Mhm.
not the lewdness or absurdity.
I agree, and here's the thing, that this is the more radical side, but it's really what bothers me, because people won't bridge the two. But what you're describing as this overt sexualization of violence is part of woke. These are not two different things. Like, before what we call woke was what we call woke, it was something else. It was part of society of exposing mass sex and mass violence to desensitize and cripple the worldview that we already had. It's what allowed woke to come in. You cannot be like, well, I hate woke and I want to keep mass pornography. It leads to it. It is part of the same ideology. Um, Contrastly, Lucky Tub, like look, you're saying, look at Impressionism versus what was done during the Renaissance. Then you have Cubism, another point is when it's eventually abstraction. Yeah, that doesn't make it a natural progression. Just because what happened did not make it a natural progression or an inevitability. In fact, a
Humans
lot of the
pushed
thing,
it in that direction.
yeah, and that doesn't mean we will naturally do that. Also,
Right.
governments pushed it in that direction. Like the
Yeah.
CIA
True.
literally pushed a lot of this kind of stuff because it wanted to show the Soviet Union, look how invested in the arts we are. So they actually picked a lot of crap. Like, I think, what was his name? The guy that made like the splatter painting. Any other time I could say, he made like the white and black splatter paintings that anybody could make by throwing stuff at a wall. And they funded that stuff. They pushed it to the top of culture. A lot of what people think is natural about culture, especially degradation and deconstruction, was forced.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's always agendas of governments, politicians, professors, musicians, you name it. It's always going to have an influence on their content and on their intent around art.
Mhm.
So, I mean, obviously, what was being promoted and idolized back in the 50s compared to now is obviously completely different. Um, but society is also degraded and eroded to an extreme extent compared to back then. So, and I feel like that stuff goes hand in hand. I don't think it's a coincidence.
Oh yeah, I mean, whatever a society's god is what it's going to emulate.
Hmm.
It's that simple. People used to say politics is downstream from culture. Well, culture is downstream from religion. Whatever a
Hmm.
society values is what it's going to build around. That's what it's going to enforce. What happened was the god, quote unquote, or religion of America got changed, and it didn't happen
Oh, yeah.
overnight, but it did.
Yeah. And I mean, folks, were to travel to different countries or live in different countries, they would see a stark difference between, some of them. I mean, what's deemed acceptable or the norm here or allowed on TV compared to Russia or other Eastern European countries is vastly different. Uh, I lived in Russia for a couple years, and it felt more like living in the 1960s, you know, or the 1970s in America in terms of, what was promoted, what was deemed acceptable. And so, yeah, it was choices by people, by governments, by educational, um, use the word educational in, institutions there loosely that made those impacts and veered our society in certain ways. So, and different cultures and different countries definitely view and they preserve art in different ways. That's for sure.
I agree. Lucky Tip. No, CIA wasn't pushing Monet; it was pushing Pollock and other ones like him. Deconstruction is natural in the sense of looking at shape and form. It would be the idea of posting the sketch versus the finished piece of the building blocks. I don't think that's deconstruction. Deconstruction. if we have to use this term, deconstruction is a philosophical view of basically destroying the logos, of saying there is no objective reality. That's where the term, as we use deconstruction, comes from. There are, it's a dumb word because it can mean various things. People can use it in various ways, but that, in the philosophical sense, is what deconstruction is. But what I'm saying is it's not natural what happened. It's natural in the sense that like humans did it, but it doesn't make it inevitable. It doesn't make it a part of a teleological or eschatological cycle. Like we have this idea like the Romans and the Greeks made these great statues, right? Then you see medieval art and it looks like compared to them a toddler drew it. But then you get the Renaissance. They look back at something. That's not a deconstruction in the sense that we're using it now. That's a reconstruction and a transcendence. You see what I'm saying? Like it's not that art naturally deconstructs. It's that art. You could argue art naturally changes because people react to things. But what I'm saying is what we are calling deconstruction and what people call woke was a purposeful thing. Art that did shock or chopped at the radical roots of a society was promoted. It was
Mm,
pushed. And
mhm.
that I would not argue is natural. And that's what I'm talking about. There's these ideas of the extremes, these things on the outside that gets centered. Like the outside becomes the center. I think Jonathan Pajot talks about that. And it's the idea of like you can have things on the peripheral, but once you change the center, like once you change the God, once you change the heart, the organism itself is now different. And that's what I'm saying has happened. And it did not
Well,
happen, what I would say, naturally.
well, and that's why art, film, all of that, right? It can be so drastically different and viewed differently by different cultures because those cultures had different governments that promoted different ideas or preserved certain ideas or certain religion, right? Like
Or dare say conserved.
conservative, exactly. So, like Russia, for example, right? They don't have that separation of church and state like America does. I mean, they literally tie in the Bible and their religion into their laws, into the government, essentially. Whereas we don't. Now, that could be why, and that's obviously post-communist Russia.
Yeah.
But even
But
the
that was a religion.
communists preserved, certain values and prevented other things from being um, brought to the surface. But I think yeah, it's the governments and it's how religion is viewed or intertwined with the governments that will determine what route those societies go, and that's why there's such drastic differences between different cultures and in countries, and you see that in how they interpret and view art. So Lucky Tub Publishing says it's the deconstruction because people were painting realism and they decided to just stop at the shapes and forms. But if it's ebb and flow, it's a natural process, just like societies as well.
Again, I'll push back and say I don't think it's natural in the idea of it's inevitable. I think a lot of we look at the especially the history of a lot of the stuff that came out was post-war, post World War One and World War Two, when there had been this massive event that had shocked people. So you get these people that then made art that we would call, I guess, a deconstruction, but then you had the people who promoted it, not just governments, that came a little bit later, but art dealers, culture makers. You have to look at was it done, why was it done, how was it done. So what I'm saying is, let's go before this. Let's go to medieval art. Medieval art lasted much longer than these art than these trends did because you had an institutional power of the church and the state that incentivized that. And if we talk, you're talking about the, I'm fixing on the 1950s, I'm talking about late 1800s. I'm saying it's the same thing. You have to look at the movement of the culture of what is pushing the art, what is promoting it, and what is doing it. I would not argue that's natural. I would say change is natural. What I'm saying is if you look at periods like medieval or even Renaissance, you look at what was funding, what was pushing it, you had a core center in that culture. What I'm saying is you have to look at why that changed. And we could say it naturally happened. I don't think so. I think maybe artists may have naturally sought out different things to do, but what were the forces that centered that art culturally? To tie it back to film and indie comics, people have always, since film has existed, people made smut films, people made porn films. What changed where now graphic scenes of violence and sex suddenly were now centered in mainstream movies and in mainstream comics? Something changed. That which was on the exterior is now on the interior. Is that naturally how things do? Things just degrade like that? Possibly. Sin is the entropy of the soul, or were there forces pushing it? Is
Well,
what
if
I'm
you go
saying.
way, way back, right? Well, if we talk about ancient Greece, right, and the
Yeah.
Spartans and, you know, Egyptians, blah, 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 right? We actually, well, because of religion and governments, right, evolved to actually go in the opposite direction as things are going in America now, right? Things became less degenerate, less, you know, violent
Less
in
deconstructed.
nature. Right. It became less deconstructed. Exactly. Basically, society and culture was reconstructed. And then at a certain point, maybe you could say 1990s, after 1990s. Well, I'd say probably early 2000s, 2010, right? That's where we start going in the opposite direction, more towards deconstruction of society and values. So, maybe maybe we're going in that direction of what it was like way back then in ancient Greece, and then there'll be another, revival into reconstruction. I mean, who knows? But yeah, it's interesting to think about that.
Yes. You could argue that, sure. And that's what I'm trying to say. I'm saying that there are forces that push things, and those forces are humans. You could argue that is natural, but the idea that things just deconstruct is what I'm saying is not natural. The idea of
Right.
just that, because we didn't see that. You didn't see the deconstruction of art during the Greek and Roman periods like that. You saw it at a specific time with specific cultural forces. Like I said, I would argue that artists change. You could argue that. I don't think what we call deconstruction is a natural process that just happens. I think reaction happens, part of
Mm.
change. But I don't think just deconstruction is a natural process. Now we might be arguing again. It's a broad, broad term. I don't like arguing like with the comments because like it's not emotional. Like no one's mad, no one's offending anyone, which is great. But you're not here, unfortunately, to express yourself in the best way. So I feel like I can talk and talk and talk, and you're having to type. So we're gonna talk past each other. I don't think that's fair, just for someone to have a mic and someone to have a keyboard. You know what I mean?
Good discussions, though. I mean, it's like I said, it's
Yeah.
very interesting to see people's perspectives on this, and to have some people go into a very, very deep and historical approach to this. Um, you guys definitely have a similar way of thinking, which is
Hey, we
what
should get
will
you on here,
drive
man.
some very interesting topics and perspectives. So headless bourgeois says, thanks for being here, by the way. uh, Wortham was driven by fame and self-aggrandizement, more than genuine appeal to morality or concern for children. And I think that's a good point, right? There's been a lot of creators in all the industries, right, where it's all about doing the shock value and pushing the limits for fame and attention or money versus pushing morals or enhancing art, right? or making the best story or the best art. And I think if anything, and again, it's dependent on governments and culture and societies, but if anything, that is a flaw in humanity, right? If anything, that's what's natural, is that humans are going to do things for money and fame, attention, um, and that's going to have an impact, usually negative, on creative spaces. And I think there's a lot of people in indie comics that are driven by the attention and potentially money versus preserving art or making the best art possible. And that's why you see a lot of that, smut content, in my opinion, on Kickstarter. Quick bucks or attention, or, just being known for doing something edgy versus just making something that would respect the medium and creating a fantastic story.
I agree, and I think on the opposite end, we agreed on this as well. Because Wortham, the idea of somebody please think of the children. It's very much like the kind of conservative ink commentators now that don't understand art, and they see woke in everything. And again, that's what I would call like those kind of stone colds of the chimney, that those cold stones of the chimney that don't have fire in them. I think that's a major problem with right wing media sphere and conservatism. Is these people, half of them are theater kids, but they still don't understand art. And
Hmm.
yeah, like looking at Batman and Robin and assuming that they're gay and that that's a subversive element. Hey, where's your sense of whimsy, man? This is Treasure Island where he goes off with Long John Silver. This is a mentor figure. There's This is David and Jonathan from the Bible. Jonathan was most likely considerably older than David, but was treated him like a brother. These ideas exist, and I'm I just the only reason I push back on the Puritan finger wag people calling people Puritans because that's such a heavy side of the dialectic now. Is just to write off anything that's spiritual, write off anything that's moral and good as like moralizing and wrong and stupid. When it's like no, like there's clearly like a sickness going on, and and you're right, Lucky Toe. Like that's why the right also fails most of the time when it comes to creation. The main thing that the right fails and the left fails this, but the left can ape this and fake it. The right does not understand the divine feminine, and I sound like a feminist saying that, but I think it's true. And honestly, I mean, I'm trying to trace it. Like, I'm probably going to go crazy doing it, but something I give Catholicism is that at least it venerates the divine feminine. It has an idea of it. Orthodoxy does it to some degree, and I
Hmm.
think that's what iconography is. I think BA will have some great interesting points on this. Protestantism, I think, does not understand it, and what's wild is it's kind of this Jungian suppressive thing or Freudian suppressive thing, because Protestantism doesn't understand the divine feminine. It's been taken over by it.
Hmm.
Because it could not build the proper hierarchy of stone. It's got fire running all through it. You go to a Protestant church now, it's nothing but feminine energy and feminine power to the extreme. And again, with the left has so much of that feminine, but it doesn't understand it, and because it doesn't have order and chaos, it can't build things. Or it doesn't have order, it has chaos. It can't build anything. It's got too much fire and not enough stone. If that makes sense.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, definitely some really interesting topics. I definitely didn't expect it to go this deep, but it's definitely enjoyable to watch you guys go back and forth on this.
Well,
But
you're
again,
smug.
this just shows just shows that everyone has their own passions in regards to the creative space, and that's what we need, right? Even if people don't agree on certain aspects, the fact that there's still passion around the arts and comics is
Yeah.
exactly what it needs. And again, if you can be like, again, Frank Miller's the best example that I can think of here, right? He was one that his main focus was story and characters. So he was able to implement the edginess, put it in,
Yeah.
introduce nudity into his books without losing the core of what makes a comic beautiful. And that's the story and the characters and the art itself, right? He didn't lose his art form in the process. And so again, there's there's a time and a place, and there's a way to implement these aspects to still respect the medium, to still preserve the medium. But then I think there's also examples of where folks are going in the opposite direction, and they're only focusing on the edginess, on pushing the
Yeah.
limits to where they lose that, the storytelling and the character building. So, but yeah.
Well, I agree. And to tie what you just said with what Lucky Tub is saying about Dave Stevens, I believe he did The Rocketeer. Um,
Mm,
I think he did the Rocketeer comic and some other stuff. But looking at his art, I'm a big Michael Turner fan, and like very few people could draw the female form as good as Michael Turner. And I think Lucky Tub, again, like you don't have a mic. I think we might be talking past each other on the term erotica. If I
mhm,
take what you're saying, I think what you're saying is like the appropriate amount of sexualization as it is found like naturally to convey an idea of a character and like hinting like a spice instead of pornography. I think that's where I think the term erotica from earlier, maybe we were talking past each other. I agree with you on that. I think that women are sexual beings. I think men are sexual beings, and they're sexual beings in different ways and how they're articulated. And I don't think there's anything wrong with a woman having sexual prowess and sexual power in a comic. But again, I think there's a proper way to do it and an improper way to do it where it doesn't, as BA was saying, it doesn't ruin the character. It does, and again, I hate to say it, but I think the feminists got this idea of objectification correct. Is when you turn a character into an object, um,
mhm,
you ruin the character, and I think that's for men and women. And it's just very easy to do. And if you look at, you can pull up some of Dave Stevens' art, and you can pull up Michael Turner's art, and I think somebody was whining about how he drew Supergirl. I think it was like a week or two ago. But when you look at it, it's like no, it just she looks like a beautiful alien creature, and he could draw her so well because she looks almost divine. She looks alien in the proper sense. So of course, like she's female and she's a foreign female. She's a super female, literally. So of course, like the sex aura about her and the sexiness about her is gonna be a little bit higher. You see what I'm saying? It's gonna
mhm,
be a little more extreme, but he did it in such a way that it's not gratuitous.
mhm. Well, and I'll give a what I think is a relevant example here would be from
Yeah,
my mini comic, right? Like Corey Barton he's a fantastic artist, but he's very, very well known for drawing the female form, right? And I gave him creative freedom to do that, but my only thing was like, just no nudity, all right? So like this was him kind of pushing the limit, with the restrictions that I gave. So, you could say like, okay, yeah, that's a bit over the top, but at the same time, right, he was able to just capture the form and basically just show a beautiful woman, right? And so, that to me is the way to do it, right? If you want to have that focus on the female form and beauty, there's a way to do that without, right, just removing the shirt. I don't think that adds to anything. Um, and again, there's a reason why you're not allowed to do that in public. And I almost want to say like, hey, I think it'd be a good thing to apply that to comics and film as well. Preference, yes, but
yeah.
there's a way that you can represent beauty and the female form without going too far, in my opinion.
Well,
So,
I think he did it well. I mean, there's beautiful women exist in the world, and in our modern world, beautiful women often dress like that. I mean, that's what happens. And I
mhm,
mean, it's a gritty crime story at the beginning there, and
mhm.
I don't want to give away too much on the female character, so I'm not going to go into like, all that because I don't want to spoil. I'll spoil other works. I'm not going to spoil your work
Mhm.
because I want
Well,
people to buy it.
and see, I also it's funny because in in the comic and the artwork I have done before, my artist went basically the same route,
Yeah,
and I was like, okay. I actually there's a way to tie a lesson into this,
Mhm.
and so the reason why like I went with that same avenue was because it's like the character, right? She's a good down to earth girl, right? But the way that she dressed was a result of right peer pressure, trying to fit in, and it also drew bad attention.
Yeah.
And that's part of why she ends up in the situation that she was in. And so there's like a lesson that she can learn, right? Of like, hey, just be yourself. You don't need to do what others do, and you don't need that negative attention type thing, right? And there's a lesson in that, right? Of just be yourself. And so that's part of that character's arc there is learning that lesson and coming to that realization of like, hey, just be yourself, and don't fall basically to society's pressure to be something you're not, or dress a way to depict yourself a way that you aren't in reality. So yeah. So it's
Yeah.
not just to like express her in that way. It's like, hey, there's actually a lesson behind it in the end. So
Well, and if a lesser artist had drawn it, particularly in indie comics, he would have had her posed a different way. What you see
right.
in the picture you presented is concern. She's
Hmm.
concerned for the man who just saved her life. Someone else would have drawn those characters, and it would have made it so she's a bit more arched back, arms are a little bit more under her
Yeah.
breast,
Uh-huh.
and
Yeah.
head turned. And it's like, okay, well, I drew the same scene. Like, no, you didn't. You drew a character a certain way to sacrifice the importance of the scene to sell this.
Right.
And that's what I'm trying to say. Like, there's room for everything if you do it right.
Hmm.
And I do think that is a technical thing. And I think that's
Hmm.
why we can have the objective argument with it.
Yep. Yeah. So, to your point, right? Like here, it's, genuine concern and rage towards what's happening to the woman. We're gonna ignore the typo here. That'll be be fixed in editing here. But, you know, and then the same thing here with implementing, right? Cursing. Like
Yeah.
that's what a demented piece of shit would say right in that situation. So it's to add dramatic effect. It also would be realistic, and his response is also going to be in line with that because of the rage he's feeling for witnessing that and for wanting to stop the rapist here. So yeah.
Well, and just even the swearing, like using him calling a woman a bitch, it's a bad guy. That's what bad
Hmm.
guys say. It's a difference than like again, we go back to an argument like the early '90s when like rap music came out, and Eve was even wild as like Maynard from Tool and like some other guys that were in like bands that were you know less than reputable in a lot of ways. Were like, hey, I don't like rap because of the way they talk about women.
Hmm.
And it's like these are
Hmm.
rock stars, and it's like, well, what do you mean? It's like, well, like you don't call a woman a bitch. Like that's just like is she attacking you? You know, maybe, but it's like it's the difference between like you're using it in one way to show what a bad person says versus you're using it to try to build the persona of yourself as a pimp. Like
Hmm.
there's different ways of using words in art.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, hey, no, good discussion around all this. I appreciate you stopping
Yeah,
by, Dan. I appreciate the chat being here. I hope
thanks
everyone
for
stops
hosting.
by next week. I think next week, one topic we didn't cover, but I think it'd be good to delve into next week is around, is there a lack of originality in indie comics, which again that does tie into the smut topic, and folks that are more just delving into the edgy side of things, but also right the recycling of public domain characters, um, basically creating your own Superman, but just changing the design a little, right? Hey, the 10th Flash character you've seen with a different name, um, and what that can do to the stereotypes around indie comics. So I think that'd be a good topic to cover next week, and I'm sure some other stuff will pop up that might be interesting to talk about. So, but yeah, appreciate everyone being here and for being so interactive, which I think is fantastic. That's what I'm hoping for. That's what I want this show to be based around. And I think there's plenty of
Well,
folks streaming after me. So feel free to go check out Joe Sontag's channel. He does a lot of great conversations around art, around what's going on in film, comics, and TV. And I think JJ is also streaming as well. So go check out one of their streams, and I'm sure they'll entertain you. So
yeah,
thanks,
it was a
everybody.
blast, man. Thanks
Yeah,
everybody. Lucky Tub, thanks for the talk, man. That was fun.
yeah, absolutely. All right, guys, have a good rest of your night, and God bless.
Good night, guys. See you.
See ya.